Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome and truly across the continent for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. There's a lot of new faces in the crowd today. We got some folks in Vermont, which is really exciting. So if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And you're catching us in a very exciting day because we are continuing our epic Space Month in conjunction with some of the coolest scientists and explorers on planet Earth who work on things beyond planet Earth. So it's been a really wild ride. You can check out all our other programs on YouTube. Tomorrow we've got Space Junk coming. We've got NASA asteroids and the Psyche mission coming up. We've got engineers of all kinds. So do check out the rest of the month all on our website for more discovery. But today you're particularly lucky because we are joined by one of my very favorite scientists that we ever bring on. Aaron Yazzie is a NASA mechanical engineer at their fabled Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Now, most of the coolest things that have happened in space exploration in the last few decades have stemmed from the amazing team at JPL. They literally get to work on robots that go and explore other worlds. And Aaron has joined us for years, sharing his stories in particular around the exploration of Mars. So if you guys are excited to go on a journey to the Red Planet together, I sure am. And I'm going to bring in Aaron to take us away on an epic adventure to our fourth planet. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us and welcome back to the program.
Hello, thank you so much for having me again. I love doing this talk every year. And so yeah, you've really got to see me sort of grow up in my role here at NASA JPL as a mechanical engineer, now becoming a systems engineer, working on a lot of really cool Mars missions.
I was going to say, before we got underway with the broadcast, you and I were talking about the missions that you've been involved with. So I think this is the third different mission that you've had the chance to work on, possibly more than that over the time that we've done programs together. So I'm really excited for our class to hear from you. I know you've got a lot to share, so I'll zip my lip if you want to bring up your presentation and take us away.
Sure thing. Give me a moment while I get this shared.
And we are golden.
Hey, there we go. So first, here's my title slide. This is actually a picture of Perseverance. I got to work in Perseverance, and I'll be talking a lot about my role on that mission. But I always like to tell people that my job right now is kind of just to play in the dirt. I deal a lot with what we call sample acquisition and handling. That's the group I'm in here at JPL is the Planetary Sample Acquisition and Handling Group, which just basically means like how do robots gather either loose rocky material like sand or rock cores or drilling into rocks and turning it into powder so that we can study it and look at all of the past geology and the past life of Mars and how did it develop over time and all of that stuff. So I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But first, let me introduce myself. So I am actually Native American. I'm Navajo. I'm from the southwest region of the United States. You can see it in the darker red spot there. So let me introduce myself in my own language. Yat she Aaron Yazzie Yaneshia, Ashihin Nishle, Todichit Need Bashichin, Ki Ane Dashe Tolkana Edashanella. So what that translates to is, hello, my name is Aaron Yazzie. I'm of the Salt Clan. So we Navajos have a clan system, kind of like a family system. So I inherited my clan from my mother, the Salt Clan, and she got it from her mother and my great grandmother and so on. And then my second clan is the Bitterwater clan, which is what I got from my dad, and he got his clan from his mother, and then my great grandmother, and so on in that line. I grew up, or I was born on the Navajo Nation. Only was there for a little while before I moved to the Red Star there, Holbrook, Arizona. It's just barely off the Navajo Nation. It's a small town in northern Arizona, and I was able to go to school there. And at the time, there weren't a lot of people that moved on to places like where I eventually ended up, Stanford University, and eventually NASA. And so I took advantage of a lot of programs that helped students like me, Native American students from small towns, to get to where I am today. And so now I currently live in Pasadena, California, which is basically the Los Angeles area, working for NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. But of course, I like to say that my story doesn't start with me when I was born. It started long before me with all of my family, my grandparents, my great grandparents, my ancestors. So here you see a picture of my mother's parents up in the top left, and then my father's parents in the bottom right. The middle picture is actually a traditional house, Navajo we call it a hogan. That's where my mom was born and where she was raised for her early childhood. And then in the bottom middle picture is my dad riding on a horse with next to my grandpa, and behind them is the hogan that he grew up in. So you can imagine they just the family and the history that we have. It's not very many generations where we had very traditional people living in traditional lives, living in houses with no running water or electricity, but that was fine. They loved that kind of lifestyle. They raised livestock and they grew corn and squash and fruits and stuff, and that's how they lived. So it wasn't until my parents were born. They were the first generation to go to school to learn English, and then they actually ended up going to college. And so they were the first generation in their families to go. My mom became a math teacher. My dad became a civil engineer, and then that set me and my brothers up. You can see in the top right, that's me, my two brothers. We grew up knowing that we were going to go to college, and so I'm very thankful for the work that they did to get to me to where I am today. And so now just a brief history of the stuff I've been able to work on. Like I said, I got to work on some really cool Mars missions. So one of the first ones I got to work on was the Mars Science Laboratory, which was the Curiosity rover. I was on the sample acquisition team as a test engineer, testing out all the ways that it drills and can process a sample and drop it off to the science instruments on the inside of the rover. So you can see a picture of me on the top right, a late night test session with the rover's twin, which is currently here on lab in an area that we call the Mars Yard. It's a place made to look like Mars, and we can practice drilling and driving in that area. I also got to work as a surface operations engineer. So when the rover landed on Mars and it was operating there was a group of people that plan out what it's going to do every day. And our team received the downlink information from the rover to determine if it did everything we commanded it to, and if it's healthy to go on for the next day. Next, I got to work on the InSight Mars lander. This was sent to Mars to study its deep interior. And so one of the things that I got to work on was the auxiliary payload subsystem, which in the top left is a white stack of disks. You see, that thing is actually a probe that allows us to measure Mars's atmospheric pressure to a very precise degree. And that helps us to understand all the stuff that's going on in the sort of like the weather that's going on around the lander while we're taking these very sensitive measurements of the ground, seeing what's going on beneath the surface of the lander. So you can see in the middle top picture, that's the stack of disks on the lander on Mars near the end of the life of the lander, and it got pretty dirty. I also got to help out as a test engineer, helping to test out how we would deploy a science instrument onto Mars, which is the seismometer. It has these little feet that when you put it on the ground, it can feel if there's any movements going on underneath the surface, like Marsquakes. So they have Marsquakes just like we have earthquakes. And so I got to help develop that deployment. And then on the bottom right, you can see it actually deploying on Mars. And then I got to work on the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. And so my role on this was I was what we call a cognizant engineer, which basically means I was the lead engineer for the rover's drill bits. And this rover is going to drive around. I'll explain this more, but it's one of its primary job is to drill into rocks and to preserve rock samples. And so this was a nice meaty part of the mission that I got to work on with the team. I'll talk more about why they look the way they do and all of that stuff. So let's get right into, and one more. So currently I am working on the Mars sample return. It's more of a campaign because it's going to consist of 2, maybe even 3 projects or missions. And my role in that is I'm the domain lead for the returnable sample tube assemblies. That means that the rock cores that we're getting with Perseverance, I'm responsible for making sure that those tubes with the rock core on the inside can successfully do all the things it needs to do throughout the campaign to get back to Earth. Okay, so let's get into why we actually study Mars. I like to show these types of pictures when I start off my presentation to sort of drive home that Mars and Earth are similar related planets. They're both rocky terrestrial planets, and I'll show you some pictures that give you evidence of that. So here's a picture that was taken by the Curiosity rover at the foothills of Gale Crater on Mars. And then here's a picture of me back home near where my grandparents' house is in the Painted Deserts in northern Arizona. Here's a picture of me standing on a, I would say like a sandstone cliff edge near Lake Powell. This area, if you've ever been to or have seen pictures or been to this area, you can tell that there's just lots of rock formations that are made out of sandstone, this like reddish clay color. And then on the right, the same kinds of rocks exist on Mars. On Vera Rubin Ridge, those are sandstones on Mars. Shadow Mountain, Arizona is on the Navajo Nation. It's where my grandparents live. It's near a lot of where there used to be a lot of volcanic activity. So that's why you see a bunch of black in the hills there. There's also a lot of petrified wood there, which is pretty cool. Like we would run up and down these hills and we would discover all these cool petrified logs and stuff. And this area is very dusty and windy. And so I was really excited to see the video on the bottom that the Perseverance rover caught. These are dust devils on Mars in Jezero Crater. That's pretty cool to see. Here's me standing in an area in northern Arizona called Monument Valley. These are pretty famous buttes. They're in a lot of old Southwest movies. This is actually the area where my dad is from, and I have a lot of family from this area. But on Mars, they have buttes there too. You can see them in the background of, I believe that's Curiosity's arm and turret. Here is a picture of right outside my hometown on the right, Holbrook, Arizona. They call this area the Painted Desert because they have all these really cool, beautiful, like pastel colors in the cliffs. And we all know that as a geologist, I'm not talking as a geologist myself, but we know that what we learn from geologists is that looking at the layers and looking at the colors of rocks, and it kind of just shows you the history of this area. And so that's kind of what we do on Mars as well, as we are looking for the different activity that we can see, the story that these rocks and these cliffs and mesas can tell us. And so on the picture on the left is Gale Crater on Mars with a similar landscape. So, like I said, Earth and Mars are related. I like to call them cousins because, like your cousins, you might grow up in a very similar family dynamic. You grew up in different households, so you turn out a little bit differently. So when we study Mars, we really we're actually like trying to kind of study ourselves. Like we know that both of these planets started to develop and form about 3.5-4 billion years ago. So they grew up on a similar time scale. They have a core, a mantle, and a crust. So they have the similar structure. Mars used to have water all over its surface, just like Earth currently has on its surface. Mars has volcanic activity, just like Earth had volcanic activity. Mars has Marsquakes. Earth has earthquakes. We know that all of these are forces that can develop a landscape. So like a canyon usually develops because there's water running through it and over time carves out this big canyon. And we know that big mountain ranges are usually created by tectonic plates moving around each other. And so the reason why Mars, the desert, like the Mars surface looks like lots of desert areas of Earth is because they were developed in the same way. And so when we send robots to Mars and study its history, we're actually learning about Earth's history as well, about how we developed over time. So that's why it's really interesting to us. And so just like they discovered water on Mars, they know that water is a sort of a building block for life. And these Mars missions that we've sent there have sort of give us more and more evidence that life could have possibly started to develop there. And so that's why Perseverance is there right now. It's drilling into the ground, into rocks, and hopefully it's going to find preserved, I would say, fossilized microbial life. And so that's the big mission that Perseverance has, and I'll go a little bit more into that. So we can't send humans to Mars yet, so we send robots instead. So this is sort of the family of rovers that have gone to Mars. The little one at the bottom was called the Sojourner rover. It was about the size of, like, I guess, a microwave. It was really just a demonstration to prove that we could drive anything on the surface of Mars, and it was successful. Next were the two little rovers on the left side. They were sent at the same time. We usually call them the twin rovers. Their names were Spirit and Opportunity. And they were sent there to look for signs of water. And they were successful. They found signs of water. And so that was really exciting for us. And then, oh boy, this is really challenging me to see which is the difference of these two next ones. And look, I can't quite tell. So I'll just say the one in the back is the Curiosity rover. The Curiosity rover was sent there to look for, now that we know that there's evidence of water there, now let's see if all the other things that we know that life needs in order to thrive, let's see if that kind of stuff is there. And so they did. They were able to study the rocks and look into the past of Mars and determine that, yeah, at one point, all the stuff that we know life needs existed on Mars at the same time. And so that got people really excited, saying there is definitely a chance that we could find that life started to develop on Mars. And so that's why they sent the Perseverance rover to not, instead of studying it and sending us data, it said, why don't we send the rocks back to Earth so that when we get them here on Earth, all the very advanced technology that we have here on Earth and the very smart scientists can study these rocks and determine once and for all if life started to develop on Mars. And of course, with the Perseverance rover, we sent Ingenuity, its little helicopter friend. Okay, so the part that I got to work on for Mars 2020 was the sample and caching subsystem. And that consisted of the parts you see circled here. So there's an arm on the front of the rover that holds what we call a turret. And it's kind of like the rover's hand. It has a couple tools on it that it can use to touch the ground to see where it can make contact. It has two science instruments on there. They're imagers. And then there's a large portion of it is made of a big drill. And this is a rotary, meaning it rotates, and percussive drill. So it hammers a little bit on the back of a drill bit and rotates, and it drills into a rock and can pull out a rock sample that is about the size of a piece of chalk. And I'll show you some examples in a future slide. And then the body of the rover holds the adaptive caching assembly. And that's where all the tubes are stored, the sample tubes. And that's where they pick them up and put them inside the drill bits. They can get a sample. And then once they have a sample inside them, they can put those sample tubes back into a storage location there. And so here's an example of how this works. So the rover is now getting ready to deploy its drill to the ground in an area that it wants to drill, and it preloads against that rock, and then it starts to drill using, this is a coring bit, and I'll describe the different types of coring bits later. And so once it breaks off or finishes drilling and breaks off that rock from its parent rock, it can return the bit to its storage location. And so you can see inside of that drill bit, there's this sample tube. This is the yellow thing that you see there. Once we put that drill bit back inside and rotate it downwards, there's another little robotic arm that can pull that tube out of the drill bit, move it to a couple locations where we can get a volume assessment, we can get a picture, and then we seal it. We put a little seal cup in there and we hermetically seal it. And then once that's done, we can return it back to its storage location. And so that's how, in a very brief summary, how we gather samples on Mars. And so the drill, or the rover, has the option of using three different types of drill bits, and these are the ones that I got to deliver and build. So if you look at the top right picture, there's a lineup of all the 9 drill bits that are currently on Mars being used by the Perseverance rover. The one on the far left is a regolith bit. Regolith basically means small rocky material or sand. Like they can put the head of that drill bit into like a sand dune and rotate it and move it around back and forth, and then the sand will fall into those little 2 windows you see there and fill up the front portion of that drill bit, and then it can tilt back and all of that sand will fall back into the sample tube. I guess I should stop right here and mention that the bottom left picture is of a sample tube, and those sample tubes can be installed inside of the drill bits. That's why they're so long there. And so once you gather a sample, it'll go straight into that sample tube, and then you can pull the sample tube out and store it. Um, in the top right picture, the 6 drill bits that are in the middle there, those are coring drill bits. So those are the heavy hitters. Those are the ones that are going to actually gather those rock cores. Um, and uh, you can see examples of those rock cores in the bottom right. On Mars, just like on Earth, there's a bunch of different types of rocks that you might encounter. So some of them are going to be pretty hard, like volcanic rock, and some of them might be pretty soft, like mudstones or sandstones. And so we have to be ready to be able to drill into all kinds of rocks. And so these are the kinds of rocks cores that we can actually samples that we can actually get. Um, and then on the far right, there are 2 little short drill bits. These ones don't gather samples or have sample tubes installed into them. Their job is just to they call them abrading bits because they really just remove a small layer on the top of the rocks. We usually use this drill bit to like sort of scout out if we want to gather an actual rock core from a certain rock. So they'll drill into it, and you can see a picture in the middle right of a little abrasion patch that they did inside of a rock. And so you can see that when you sort of remove the layer, there's all these little speckles that you can look, and they can use the instruments on the rover's arm to image it and sort of get elemental. An idea of what the elemental makeup of a rock is, and sort of just guess that, oh yes, this looks like an interesting rock. I think we should get a rock core sample, and then they would go back and get a coring bit and get a rock core. And so this is me and my team. We in the clean room, and all the drill bits are lined up there. We just finished building all of them. It took a lot of time, and we're very proud. We're smiling ear to ear. Of course, you can't see it because we are completely covered. This mission, because it's trying to look for signs of life on another planet, we had to be extremely careful about cleanliness, meaning we can't have anything from Earth or from our person or anything transferred to the drill bit that will then drill into a rock on Mars and look for life. So that means like anything, like like you can shed skin, you can shed hair, you can have cat fur on you. You can't. You might slobber on it. Like you can't have any of that stuff happen. And so we wear these clean. We call them bunny suits. That's the actual term that we use to call them. They help keep the hardware clean, but they also help us to remain what we call grounded. It's a electrostatic discharge, making sure that we don't transfer little static charges to our computerized components. But on top of the bunny suits, the white bunny suits, we had to then put on sterile smocks, sterile goggles, and sterile gloves. So we had to be extremely clean when we were in this room, to the point that the morning that before we go into the clean room, we couldn't have used like hair products or anything like that you would use to get ready that has scent to it, like your deodorant or a shampoo or a conditioner or even hair gel. Um, you can wear makeup there. So yeah, it was just a very strict, clean environment, but we did our due diligence and we got the job done. And we're happy to install them into the bit carousel, which is the image you see in the top right. That's the big assembly that holds all 9 drill bits, and it spins around and it gives the rover the ability to grab whatever bit that it needs. And then the bottom right is the picture of that bit carousel being installed onto the rover. And that was me on the day. I got to observe in the clean room. So this was a live cam showing the work being done, and I caught myself on it. And then after I was able finally delivered the drill bits, the rest of the rover had to go off and get built and had to get tested and stuff before it was getting ready for launch. And then I shift my priorities to testing out all of the drilling capabilities of the rover to make sure that when we could come up with sequences and commands that the rover needed to successfully get a rock core. So there's me in a giant test chamber on the left side. That's a big 10-foot vacuum chamber, environmental test chamber that we could build up the whole adaptive caching assembly. So it has all the sample tube storage with its little robotic arm. It has the bit carousel with all the bits. It has the arm, and it has the turret with the drill and all the science instruments on it. And then we would put little rock stands with rocks on top of them, different types of rocks, so that we could drill multiple times. And then we would close this up, and we would make it very cold inside to mimic Mars's very cold atmosphere. We would pump all the air out because Mars also has a low pressure of air. We couldn't do anything with gravity, but that was okay. But basically, when you're in, if this arm and this drill, while it's inside this chamber, could feel like it was on Mars, and we could practice drilling. So that was a very cool test bed that I got to work with, and some cool people. And then there's another test bed on the right, or the top right, which is where we tested out software. And then down on the bottom, sometimes I got to actually work with the rover's twin, which is here on Earth, and they usually build a duplicate of the flight rover, so the one that's going to go to Mars, and one that we will always save here to test with on Earth before we send commands up. And we usually call that the qualification model. So that's me in the bottom right, standing in front of the qualification model of the Perseverance rover. And here, the rover made it safely to Mars. One of the first things that it did, it deployed its little helicopter friend, Ingenuity. This helicopter was sent along with the rover just to prove that we could fly something on Mars. Mars's atmosphere is really thin, and so it's really hard for something like a helicopter to operate there, because it needs sort of like the air pressure to be able to push off of and create lift. And so they wanted to see if flying things on Mars is even possible, and it successfully did. That we proved that we can fly little, I guess, like little drone helicopters on Mars. And very exciting for me, I got to experience the drill bits that I built actually being used. So on August 2nd of 2021, the top right picture is the abrasion patch made by one of the abrading bits. And then on the bottom right is the first time that we drilled and got a rock core on August 6th of 2021. And then it went on to do more. And so the really fun thing about this mission is that I just get to see these awesome pictures of these drill bits that I once held in my hands, actually doing what they're supposed to do on Mars. And it's just really thrilling to see these pictures. So in the top left, you see a coring, sort of staring straight into a coring bit, the front end of it. And you can see there's a little rock core in there. The top right is the turret holding a braiding bit. The bottom left is once again a picture of the rock core. The reason why we get so many pictures of the drill bits is because they're inspection pictures. We drill, and then they'll usually hold it in front of the rover's camera, which is sort of like at the level of it's on what we call the mast, but it kind of looks like the rover's head and its eyes. So they'll hold it up there and take a picture to show, like, what did we get a rock core? Is there anything sticking out that we don't want there? That kind of thing. And we can also check to see how much the bit is wearing. And then on the bottom right, we got a very close-up picture using one of our science instruments of an actual core, like a hole that we drilled from a rock core. So I think this is one of the more recent pictures of the rover, taken July 23rd, 2024. This is a selfie that the rover took. The rover is able to take a selfie because on the end of its arm, it has a camera. And so it'll hold its arm out just like we would with our phones, and it's able to take a selfie. This is actually a bunch of pictures that the rover will take, and then we stitch them together to create this big image. And you can see how dusty the rover is getting. It has been up there since 2021, so that's already past its prime mission. So it's doing great. So to date, it has been on Mars for 1,302 Mars sols. So a Mars day is, they call them a Mars sol. And the interesting fact about a Mars sol is that it's only 40 minutes longer than one Earth day. So it's almost the exact, like, Mars and Earth are rotating almost exactly the same speed, only 40 minutes difference. So that equates to about 3.5 years. It has driven 32 kilometers, which equates to about 20 miles. and it's going to do a lot more driving as well. It's collected 22 rock core samples. It's collected 2 regolith samples, that loose rocky material or sand. It's collected 1 atmospheric sample and 3 witness tube samples. So a witness tube is basically a little assembly that whenever we drill something and we think it's interesting and we want to understand any background, like stuff that might be specific to that region of Mars, we'll open up what we call a witness tube sample, and it has a witness plate on the inside that just gets exposed to the atmosphere around that area, and then they seal it up so that we can compare the two and see if we see the same types of signatures. So there are still some more tubes on the inside. There's 11 sample tubes that we can fill with more rock samples from today on, and there's 2 more witness tubes that we can use. So all of the images, these really cool, very clear and beautiful images that I've been showing, I acquired from the mars.nasa.gov website, and you're able to, I believe, you're able to go in and look at these pictures and download them if you do, and the really cool thing about that site, if you go to the raw images, is that they will put the images that the rover sent down to us like almost immediately up to that site, so you can see like what the rover did yesterday. It's very cool. Okay, so now I'm on the next mission, which is called the Mars Sample Return Campaign. And so this involves Perseverance. We're still going to use its capabilities, but we are likely going to send a lander to Mars, which is going to carry with it a big rocket on its back. And this rocket is how we're going to be able to send the rock samples that we're collecting from Mars back to Earth. So this is the first time that we've ever attempted to launch something from Mars and return it to Earth. And so the big rocket that you see in the top right of this image, the very front of it, that is what we call the nose cone. And that when it's in the lander, you can open it up and there's a little assembly in there that we call the orbiting sample assembly. And inside of that little, it's kind of like a spherical shape. Inside of that little sphere has a spot for 30 sample tubes in it. And so we can, Perseverance rover can drive over to the lander. There's going to be a robotic arm that we use to transfer tubes from Perseverance to the lander and install them inside of that nose cone. Once we're all done and all 30 of them are collected, then we launch that rocket into orbit. It'll either orbit around Mars, or it will turn to what we call cislunar orbit, which means the orbit that's closer to the Earth and the moon, our moon. And then there will be another mission sent to try to retrieve those from whatever orbit is in and return them back to Earth. And so part of my job, like I said at the very beginning, is I'm the domain lead for the returnable sample tube assemblies. So what makes it a returnable sample tube assembly is that now the sample tube has a rock core inside of it, or a loose rocky material sample inside of it, and it has a hermetic seal on the front end to protect it. And I have to make sure that all of those missions that I described, there's a robotic arm and they pack it into this little spherical canister, and the rocket shoots it up, and then it gets caught by another mission and it gets brought back to Earth. I have to make sure that the sample tubes are safe and that they can survive each of the legs of that trip. One of the first cool tests that I got to be involved in is creating a depot on Mars. This is the backup option in case we can't, for any reason, transfer from the Perseverance rover to the new lander. So we picked a place on Mars where we dropped 10 sample tubes as our backup option. We know that we can grab those if we need to. And so this was us doing a sample tube drop test to see, like, what is the behavior of the sample tube. Does it want to roll? Does it bounce in an unpredictable way? So this is us actually crawling underneath the qualification model of the full rover and observing the sample tubes drop from underneath the adaptive caching assembly inside the rover. And then we actually did it on Mars. So that's a cool thing, a comparison of watching this on Earth and then turning it into actually doing it on Mars. And so there's the full depot of the 10 sample tubes dropped. Yeah, it was very cool to be part of that. And then I went on. A large part of my job is just to do a lot of testing, to prove that a lot of the stuff that the tube will go through won't either break the tube or break the hermetic seal. And so in the bottom right, you can see at one point we thought that we were going to have a helicopter go and pick up sample tubes. And so that's the helicopter doing an imaging test to see if it can image where a sample tube is.
Back to Earth. That's what the engineers are working on behind us.
And
Can
then
you tell us a
this.
little bit more about those tests?
The tower behind
I'll
me
let
is
it talk.
actually able to mimic the event from when the canister holding the sample tube will land back on Earth.
Speaking of final descent back to Earth,
Okay, so that
engineers are working on behind
that
us.
image that you just
Can
heard,
tell us a little bit more about those tests?
that voiceover that you just heard was actually a video of me that done by NASA JPL, and I was describing the test that I was doing using this giant tower, and you can see the slow-mo video of that canister. This is to mimic the canister that's holding the sample tubes. At one point we thought that the way that it would return to Earth is by just basically falling out of orbit and entering Earth's atmosphere and just landing in the deserts of Utah without a parachute. And so this tower was able to mimic that impact. So it would basically throw that assembly into a sandbox, and we would test to see if it could survive this Earth impact landing in the Utah desert. So that was a really cool, fun test that I got to do as well. In the bottom left is one of my teammates, Rebecca, installing a sample tube test article onto what we call a shock beam or a tunable beam. And so that is that tests if there's any type of latching mechanisms, or when it gets captured or something, there's a very shock-like environment. If that can damage the tube. And so we did a test to make sure that the shock environment was okay. And then in the top right is a picture of the robotic test bed. This is the way that we're testing out how to use a robotic arm to install a sample tube inside of that spherical canister. And so, yeah, that's a gist of my work. I've also been able to do a lot of really cool things outside of work. I was involved in a PBS show called Native America, where they actually filmed me at work and they filmed me back home on the Navajo Nation. I received an award for the work that I did on perseverance through the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. I got the Technical Excellence Award. I also was inducted into the Stanford Multicultural Hall of Fame, Alumni Hall of Fame this past year. In the bottom right, I was part of the PVS Nova program. They actually followed me around on the landing day and get my reaction to all the events that surrounded that. This was during COVID period, so I was watching it from home, and they caught me saying to the camera, "I just want to hug somebody," because I was here in my apartment and I wasn't with my team. So that was funny that they actually have it captioned as well. And then in the middle right is the employee resource group at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory for Native Americans and Indigenous people. And so that's the team of people that I work with as part of that employee resource group. And so this is my last slide. Oh, I forgot to describe that at the very beginning. You might have seen this Navajo saying that I put, which means it's up to you. It's sort of something that I always like to tell myself. That's something I was taught, that if you want something to happen for yourself, then go do it. It's up to you. It's your you have the motivation and you have the skills and you have the knowledge to do it, and do it for yourself. You don't have to rely on your parents telling you what to do, or your teachers. Like, it's up to you to get to where you want. And so that's what I always like to remind myself.
Aaron,
okay, my last slide. Thank you.
That is fantastic, man. And thank you so much for these links so that kids can follow along with your journey, your story, extra info after the broadcast is done. If you want to come out of screen share so you can see me again, have a bit of a conversation, we are going to dive in with Q&A. But that was marvelous. And I love, this is unrelated to the gist of most of the presentation, but I just want to highlight Monument Valley was the first place I ever rode a horse. It was the coolest place I've ever been in my life. Everyone should get to go. The Navajo Nation, that whole part of the world, is like one of the most special places on planet Earth. So thank you for sharing your history and backdrop and where you grew up, because it is a really spectacular spot. That was very neat. Also, Oh man, I've lost it. You used a phrase when you went into the clean room, and it's not, you can't sneeze on something. Basically, is the way you phrased it, but it was amazing. No one's ever talked that way. But don't sniffle on any Mars robots. Is the moral of the story, kids.
That's right.
So we've already got a few questions, which is amazing, and please do keep them coming, folks. One of our first ones is there engineering community that you get to work with to share data and sort of hone your skills and get better at your work? When you collect this data from Mars, are there people you run it by? Are they all at NASA? Anything you can share on that would be great.
Yeah, so I guess there's two different things. One is the science community, and one is the engineering community. We work hand in hand to make all these missions possible. And so the science community is big. They will reach out to scientists across the world. The part of my job now as the engineer for the returnable sample tube assemblies is that the rocks inside, scientists care very much about those rocks. And so I actually get to communicate with people, with scientists at different universities, different laboratories across the world about various things. And so there's that. And they all have a council of that they talk with each other, and they discuss like where should we get a sample from next, and that kind of thing. And then as far as the engineering community, I would say that one, we have the JPL community. There's so many brilliant engineers at NASA JPL from all across the world, and learning from them is amazing. And so towards the beginning of my presentation, I shared that family of rovers. So I came in sort of in the middle with Curiosity, and I got to work on those. But prior to that were those Mars exploration rovers, the twin rovers, the Sojourner rover. People that worked on those early monumental missions are now my managers, and I get to learn from them, and it's just really incredible. So that's the kind of the community I get to learn from.
So nice. And I'm so glad you highlighted this collaborative approach. This is something that we deal with in all our scientific topics, but you see a lot of it at NASA in particular. Like, these are the best engineers in the world working on the most important projects that there's the most investment in of anyone. And so every time we have JPL folks on, we get to highlight this collaboration. It's one of the coolest things about getting to be a scientist or engineer, is that you get to work with the smartest people in the room all the time in an international community. So I really appreciate that answer.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add on too that, like, for Mars sample return, it's not just a JPL thing. We're working with other NASA centers, NASA Goddard, NASA Langley. I'm probably forgetting others. And then we're also working with ESA, the European Space Agency. They're actually delivering large components of the Mars sample return campaign. So like it's collaborative across NASA, and it's collaborative across other space agencies.
Quick question: does our Canadian Space Agency get involved in any way, or is this an ESA thing and we're more focused on like Canadarm and moon stuff? You know,
I don't know if Canada's space agency is contributing to this, but it's definitely one of those things where it's like open to like if there's an idea, if there's a capability, we'll take advantage of it.
Cool. Okay, Canadians, astronauts, space people, get involved in these cool projects. We'd love to hear some more stories about that too. We've got Cookie joining us in BC, and she wants to know, what's the hardest project aspect that you've ever worked on? Is there anything that jumps out that was like the biggest challenge you've ever had?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that with Mars in particular, we're on a set schedule. Because of the way that Mars and Earth orbit the sun, actually one orbit of Mars is almost exactly 2 years on Earth. And so they both take the trip around the sun, but they kind of take slightly different oblong shaped orbits. And so every 2 years, Mars and Earth are pretty close to each other. And that's when we like to send missions back and forth, because it's less fuel, less mass, less time to travel. And so if we miss that window of opportunity when the two planets are pretty close to each other, then we have to wait 2 more years before we have another chance to launch again. And we saw that happen with Curiosity. It missed its launch date, and it had to launch 2 years later, and that's never good for us. That it jeopardizes the funding that we have and the people that are working on it and stuff. And so we work very hard on a very strict timeline to make sure that we make it to that launch date and we get it launched on time.
We've never had that as an answer before, so thank you so much for that. We've talked about the Mars launch window, and I encourage our classes to look that up, but I never thought about it as like, okay, you're really on the clock if you mess this up, or if you don't get this, confirmed in time. It really does change the whole dynamic of everything.
Right.
Cool. Great question, Cookie. We had a question that I love, and it's a question of mine too, so it's perfect, a chance to ask. the suits you wear, how do you know that they're clean? Like yours has these goggles, which I've hardly ever seen in any of the suit pictures in my life, but like it's gloves, it's the thing. Like, is there like quality control on them? It must be incredible. Do you know?
Right. Right. Yeah. So I described that there's sort of two layers. The inner layer is what is the full bunny suit. It comes with a bunny suit that comes from your neck all the way to the ends of your wrists and then down to your feet. And then we put little booties that are kind of like size of boots. They go up to your knee about. And then there's also a hood that kind of covers all of this, kind of keeps your hair out of the way. And that's usually all you need to. Oh, and then we also put a little face mask on. That's usually all you need to get into a clean room. And those garments we only use like maybe once or twice, and then they get sent off and they get cleaned at the special cleaning place. And then when they come back, they're in these plastic sheets that you open, and then you can put them on again. And then there's the second layer. For those of us that were working on what we call sample intimate hardware. So those were the sample tubes, those were the drill bits, those were the seals. Those are the really critical items that we could not get any speck of ourselves onto. And so those were sterile. They came in this little pack that you could open, and they had been through a sterile process. So we would put the smock on and we had to put it on without touching the outside of the smock. We had to be very careful about only touching the inside that would touch our bodies. And then we would put on the sterile goggles that made sure that, I guess, sweat, or if you were crying in the clean room, that none of that got onto the parts. And then we had these sterile gloves that you would open up this pack, and then you had to try to put on the gloves by only touching the inside of the glove, not the outside. You would put it on there, and then you would use the other one to sort of put that cuff onto the other one, and you finally had your gloves on, and then somebody had to open the door for you because the door handle might be dirty, So like it was that level of cleanliness.
Wow, thank you for the nitty gritty. That's fantastic. Holy, we've had people in particle physics labs before. I've been to a particle physics lab before, and I thought that was a heavy duty sterile where you're showering and putting on the suit, but that's next level. It doesn't get better than that. Geez, Aaron, time flies and you're having fun. So we are nearing the end of the broadcast. So I want to take just a couple more quick questions before we finish. By the way, the idea of you crying is fantastic. Save the crying for when the mission actually launches, not in the clean room. That's our moral of the story for today, for future engineers. Simple one, have missions collected ice samples, or is it just rock? What are we getting?
Yes, so there's no ice in the region that the Perseverance rover is, and none in where Curiosity is. But I believe the Phoenix lander, which is I forget the timeline of that, but it was before the time that I was at JPL. That was specifically sent to the icy cap of Mars to study the ice there and actually try to determine if that ice is watery ice. So they have studied the ice on Mars before.
Yeah. In fact, we've got Abigail Freeman coming on fairly soon, and she talks all about the ice and past rivers on Mars and everything else. So I really encourage you to check out her program too. Again, we've got a really fun space month for you guys. Aaron, time flies, as I said, and I could go all day, but I want to wrap up with one final question before we say a big thank you and farewell, which is the classic question we get for everyone at NASA, which is, do you think there's life on Mars? And you can extend this to elsewhere in the universe, or what? What's the official scientific opinion? Feet to the fire, life in the universe or Mars? Go.
So I say yes, I believe it. And when I talk about life on Mars, like it's not the kind of life you might see in a movie, like of aliens with like an actual head and toes and everything like that. We're looking for microbial life, so the kind of stuff that you see growing in a body of water. And so not only for Mars, because all the signs are showing that, yes, there could have been microbial life that started to form there billions of years ago, but other places too. Like the Europa Clipper mission just launched, and it's going to one of the moons of Jupiter, Europa, and it's covered, that moon is covered in ice, but underneath that ice is water. And they truly believe that all the energy that's inside of that moon and all of the heat and stuff could be a good candidate for hosting life. So that's exciting too.
It's really exciting, and I'm so glad you answered it this way, because I will stress for our kids, literally every time we have someone involved in space, whether they're an astrophysicist, astronomer, NASA engineer, etc., this is the universal answer. Like, we're exploring the places that are the best candidates in our own solar system for life right now. Mars, Europa, future missions to Enceladus, Titan, etc. And like, that's really, really exciting. The universe beyond that is huge, tremendously huge. There are more planets out there than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of the world. And life arose here really fast. Like when the Earth had the capacity to have life, life arose pretty much instantly. And so we look for these places that have conditions that might have been similar. And to think that there's all that space out there with no life, it's been a universal yes from everyone we've ever asked on this program that knows the most about it. So it's an exciting sign. I mean, we may never know. That's why we probe. That's why we search. It's why we explore. I sure hope that we do find it someday. I'm in the same camp, and I love that as our final answer for today. So, Aaron, before we wrap up and say farewell, is there any last message you want to leave our kids with about your work, about the Mars sample return, anything before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I think one thing that I always like to express, especially when talking to students your age, is that these missions are happening right now, but they're going to continue happening when you have gone through your studies and have graduated and become a scientist or an engineer, meaning that you can work on this too. Like Clipper is going to take years to get to Europa, and then maybe by that time you have had your education and can be part of the discoveries of life in that area. So that's exciting to see that you have the potential to contribute to this as well.
It certainly is. It's the golden age of space exploration, whether you want to be an astronaut or engineer or scientist or whatever. There's more missions, more excitement than there's ever been in history. I really encourage our classes, in addition to Aaron's amazing websites and social media pages, jpl.nasa.gov, incredible educational resources, lots of missions on the go. You can literally leave this broadcast right now and go look at like live pictures from Mars, which is absolutely insane. I cannot believe that's a thing that everyone could do and that they're not doing it. Just go right now. Leave the broadcast. Aaron, thank you so much for your time today. Expertise, everything. Stick around for after we're done, but have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, and we will say farewell from there. Bye for now, Aaron. Thank you so much.